Hey guys, today I've got David Wood with me. I'll introduce you in a second, but how you doing, David?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Great to have you. So let me just give you guys a bit of an introduction about David. For those of you who may not know who he is, he's got a very, very popular YouTube channel, over 78,000 subscribers, 20 million plus total views. I'm envious of such metrics. Finished his PhD a few years ago in philosophy, but specifically he focused on religion. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that before we get going.
Well, yeah, my background is atheism, so I've always been interested in some of the most prominent arguments of atheists, and the sort of bedrock argument of atheism is the problem of evil. If God exists, why is there so much suffering, or something along those lines? And the argument's taken various forms over the years, and sort of the most recent forms that philosophers of religion are using is a Bayesian version of the argument from evil. So I did my dissertation on the Bayesian argument from evil, which is interesting to, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred people in the world.
Well, one of the things in academic writing is that if you write an academic book and it sells 1,000 copies, that's considered a best-selling academic book.
Yeah.
So the metrics of diffusion are very different in academic writing. I hear
Yeah.
you. So I thought what we'd start. You pointed to the fact that you were interested in atheism, and I think you were an atheist, and then some personal issues happened in your life that led you to your current Christian faith. Can you walk us through this very interesting personal history?
Sure. It's the full story is a bit longer, and people, if people want a more detailed story, they can type in David Wood, Why I'm a Christian, and it'll pop up on YouTube. But the condensed version is there are basically kids growing up who have mental health problems, but don't know about it, don't know what's wrong with them, and don't even know that there is something wrong with them, and no one explains it to them, and so they grow up, and they can end up messing up a lot before anyone actually before the system actually catches on that someone has a problem here. And so I was growing up, and I had all kinds of problems. I had delusional thoughts. I thought that at various times I thought that I controlled the weather, or that I could control time, things like that. They weren't lasting. It would, I might have a problem for a couple minutes or a couple months or something like this, and then it would go away. But another problem was I didn't have normal emotional reactions to things, and eventually I didn't find this out until I was already in a lot of trouble and in a psychiatric hospital, and they put on my paper, on my diagnosis, antisocial personality disorder, and didn't tell me what that was, didn't give me any kind of inclination about what I needed to do. It wasn't until years later when I actually looked up the word sociopath, right? I was like, what exactly is a sociopath? And it said someone with antisocial personality disorder. And I was like, wait, that's me. Well, that would make sense of things, wouldn't it? And, then, hey, I started understanding something. But basically got into a lot of trouble as I was growing up, but it was just treated as, hey, here's a kid who gets into, lots of trouble. I was 18 years old, and I attacked my father with a hammer. I left him for dead. I thought he was dead, and I drove away. And
What triggered that attack or that response? Was there a history between you two that was a bellicose history? What happened?
no, no. This was almost just completely philosophical in nature. It's basically I've been told all my life that certain things are right and wrong, and I believe those things. And then I realized that according to my worldview, what I actually believed about the world, those moral rules, those moral, the moral duties, moral obligations, they don't have the kind of status that I'm told that they have. It's basically, if you have just a naturalistic perspective, there are only a couple of places you can go to get your idea of what the status of these moral rules are, and you can say that. They were hardwired into our ancestors. So, our ancestors that had these traits were better able to survive. They were better able to function in groups and so on. And so they're hardwired into us. Or you can say society, puts these into us. And I realized that I can't really trust either one of those sources as far as giving me any sort of moral obligation. I mean, a lion is hardwired to kill all the cubs of a competing pride when it moves into another pride, and that helps.
I discussed that in one of my books, but go ahead.
Yeah, and that helps the lion pass on its genetic information. I don't see how that has anything to do with whether it's right or wrong. And then, as far as society is concerned, I mean, someone who's marching for social justice or something like that over here feels very strongly about what they're doing, but the guy who in Afghanistan who kills his sister for walking down the street without a male escort, he feels just as strongly about what he's doing. And so just being told or trained by society doesn't seem like a good source either. And so you get to a point where you have to strive for some sort of consistency. And hey, I've got these moral beliefs, and I believe that these things are like absolutely right or absolutely wrong, and they can't have that status given these other things that I believe. And so you can drop that belief that they're really right or really wrong, or you can change your beliefs in order to include something that would make them really right or really wrong, or you can just live with the inconsistency. And with me, of course, I was convinced that all this talk of right and wrong is just nonsense. It's just nonsense. Why do I believe these things? Well, I believe that I'd kind of been brainwashed, right? I've been polluted by people telling me things all my life, and following a really, really twisted version of something Aristotle said when he said if you go too far in the doctrine of the golden mean, if you go too far in one direction towards one extreme, try going to the other extreme for a while, like bending a stick in the opposite direction. Bend it too far in the other direction, and then let it go, and it'll be nice, and you'll get that golden mean.
All good things in moderation.
Yeah, so with me, it's, hey, whatever I've been told about right now, I need to actually start doing the opposite to get these things out of my system. And so I just started doing every awful thing I could do. And
that philosophical turmoil within you led to the attack on your dad?
Yeah, it was. It was like protesting. Like if I really believe that this is all a bunch of nonsense, and and keep in mind I have mental health problems, right? So it's not just here's my worldview. I also have delusional thoughts and so on. So it's really a combination of everything, but that combination led me to feel like I'd been polluted by society, right? Like I'd been polluted and brainwashed and manipulated into doing certain things. And, I mean, just imagine if you found out you believed a bunch of things and then you all of a sudden found out that someone had been brainwashing you and manipulating you all your life. You'd be actually angry, right? Whoa, look at what this person has been doing to me all my life, and I want to lash out and so on. And so that's how.
So did he die during the attack, or did he survive?
He's dead now. He died of a heart attack, but he survived that.
So you were convicted of an assault.
Yeah, malicious wounding. So,
and then you went to prison. You were an atheist at that point. And you discovered your faith in prison.
Yeah, I was arguing with a Christian there who it was interesting. He was an interesting fellow. He had turned himself in for 21 felonies. So this guy becomes a Christian. He was in the Navy, and he goes back and confesses to 21 crimes that he committed over the years. And so I'm in there with this guy, and I started by making fun of him. And but
you're making fun of a guy who confessed to killing 21 people. You got some.
No. He didn't kill 21 people. He confessed to 21 crimes that he committed.
21 crimes. Sorry. Okay, gotcha. Yes.
Yeah. And so we got into a lot of arguments and stuff. We ended up kind of becoming friends, but he made me think that maybe I need to look into a lot of things more than I have, because I'm just going with, hey, here's what I believe. And maybe I really need to examine the foundations of what I believe and so on. And along the way, I became a Christian.
Now, okay, so that you're lucky, by the way, that you didn't go into prison today, because right now you'd be Muslim, because the Muslim proselytizing in prison.
That was already there. That was there, by the way.
That was there back then. Okay. Now, what years was that we're talking about?
So this was, I went to jail and a psychiatric hospital in 94, and then I was out, and then I was in 95. And so 95, I meet this Christian, and it was a year later, after, reading and so on, 96 when I became a Christian.
So technically I could have been, if the other group had won in converting you, I would be speaking to Abdul Rahman Aziz right now, right?
If someone else had won me over, you'd have been reading about me on the news. I think.
Right. Okay. So now let's move on to your current work. What is it in your case that served, if there is a catalyst? What is the catalyst in your case that said, you know what, I'd like to forcefully use my freedom of speech to the extent that we still have it to criticize specifically Islam, as you do in all of your work?
Well, I'd had interactions with Muslims in prison, had discussions. I had a weightlifting partner who was the imam there, who was the imam of the Muslim community. But as far as really studying Islam, when I got out of prison, went directly into college, and there met a guy named Nabil, and we ended up sharing a hotel room together on a school trip, and got into an argument right off the bat. And
you are one cantankerous fellow.
Yeah. Well, actually, I had prayed. I said, God, I don't want to, be accused of being a bigot or something. So if you want me to talk to this guy, let him start it. And then a couple minutes later, he goes, so are you a hardcore Christian? And that's where it started. But he started it, so that's on him. But we ended up discussing things for about 4.5 years. And, I started to realize that the psychological barriers that are placed on Muslims from considering anything other than Islam. I mean, you're told that the unforgivable sin is associating partners with Allah. So, if you convert to another religion, you say Jesus is Lord or something like this. That's a one-way ticket to hell. Even in a best case scenario, usually you're going to have to give up your family, and that's big family, right? That's not just mom and dad, that's sisters and cousins and aunts and uncles. And, it's a big deal for a Muslim to leave Islam.
Can I just interject before you go on? I just received an email today from a gentleman. I won't give too many details, not that anybody could track him specifically, but he is from a 100% Islamic country, and he was writing to me to say that he is currently studying in the United States, and he fakes his belief. He fakes as though he still believes, although he really has left Islam precisely because he is afraid of his family.
Yeah, I hear from those guys regularly too, and I understand why. And then of course you have the third, which is that in Islam the penalty is actually death. It doesn't get carried out much, especially in the West. But as things get more and more radical, as the Muslim community becomes more aggressive, you'd always have to be wondering, hey, is someone actually going to take this seriously one day? As Muhammad said, anyone changes his religion, kill him. So I started noticing. But
you must not. Probably you don't understand the word "kill" because you're a white American guy. But if you spoke Arabic, you'd know that the philology of "kill" is to caress, right?
Yeah. And in Malik's Muwatta, he specifies the method. It's chop off his head. So
metaphorical. I don't buy it.
That's one awesome caress there. But I started noticing these things. Eventually, so years go by, Nabil goes off to medical school and so on. I go off to graduate school in philosophy, and Nabil eventually becomes a Christian. And it was interesting because I thought, cool, I'm done with Islam now. So but my entire reason for studying Islam back then was my best friend was a Muslim. So, we'd become best friends. We would spend all night arguing and laughing and goofing off and back to arguing and so on. And eventually he becomes a Christian, but that's why I was going through his sources. And this is where I started doing a lot of studying in Islam, because he would give me an argument from Islam. So here's something that proves that Muhammad was a true prophet, and he would be quoting Sahih al-Bukhari. And so I would go to Amazon and I would buy the collection so I could look it up, but then I would keep reading. And then I would come back to him and say, look what this says. Look what this says right here. This is a source you're quoting to me, and look what else it says. And of course, this is new information to him, because for Muslims, their information about Islam is filtered to them through their leaders and so on. And so Nabil becomes a Christian, and I think, cool, I'm done with Islam now. And then it was actually Muslims who started challenging us to debate, because they don't like it when you leave Islam. So, and they didn't want any younger Muslims following Nabil's example and saying, hey, why'd this guy leave Islam? Maybe I need to look into this as well. So they wanted to expose and embarrass us on stage. They wanted to embarrass him to show he's stupid for leaving Islam. And they wanted to expose me. So it was Nabil was stupid for listening to what this guy said. And so that's how we started debating. And it was somewhere along the line. I mean, it took Nabil about a month before he got his first death threat, and it was on his car. It was under the windshield wiper under his car. And so it was sort of along the way that I realized, hey, there are lots of Christians who are focusing on lots of issues, and there are obviously lots of issues in the world today, but this seems like the biggest problem that there is right now, and very few people are dealing with it. And I understand why. As soon as you start criticizing Islam, you start getting death threats. I just earlier today I got a comment, a message from a Muslim who says he wants to rape my mother and burn me to death on top of her.
But
And
peacefully, but peacefully.
Yeah. Yes, the caress, the caress translation, and so you just get and you're called bigot and race. If you argue with atheists, you'll get called stupid. They'll call you stupid, but you generally don't get racist and bigot and things like that, and you generally don't get threats to burn you alive and rape your mother. And so it's if you're deciding what you want to do in life and you start dealing with Islam, there's some huge psychological pressure there to do anything else. And there are lots of people who start dealing with Islam and they're like, whoa, I've dealt with this for a couple days now, and I feel like I need a shower from everything that's been hurled at me. And so this is not what I'm most interested in. I would be much more interested in just philosophy of science and things like that. But I look around and hey, I want my kids to have a better world than the world I came into, and not a worse world. And so you got to deal with Islam.
Well, I tell my wife the exact same thing, because she often tells me, look, you have a very busy career as a professor, as a scientist. It's not as though you're lacking things to do. Why do you take on this additional burden? And my response is, we have young children. I'm not doing it for me. I come from that world. I come from Lebanon. I was born there. I escaped the civil war in Lebanon. I escaped execution in Lebanon. But I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it for my children. And I think that once you put it in those words, then it becomes clearer why it is important that we fight any illiberal ideology, right?
Yeah.
But I was going to say, so you're you're very strong in your Christian faith. Do you think that your not your venom, but how forceful you are in your work would have been affected had you stayed an atheist? In other words, is the content of your message, does it hold irrespective of whether you were an atheist or not?
For me, no. For other atheists, it may be, but I mean, I know what kind of atheist I was. So, in other words, I knew how I viewed the world and so on, and going out and fighting for human rights just wouldn't have been an issue it wouldn't have been on my radar as far as something that I even cared about. So me personally, it makes a difference, and it makes a difference in another way. I don't hate Muslims, right? So when I'm talking to Muslims and I'm sharing information with them, it's not, oh, I hate you and I hope you die and you're an awful person and you're just evil because you're a Muslim. My concern for Muslims is I view them as like they've been manipulated all their lives and so on, and they've been if you take a young kid and pump him full of a bunch of false information. I mean, what Muslim leaders tell young Muslims, I'm not saying it's false because I disagree with it. It's false according to Muslim sources, right? And they still keep pumping this into them. And so I look at someone, I look at them as almost like they've sort of been intellectually kidnapped or hijacked, and so we're helping them, and it wouldn't be very loving if we just said, oh, we don't want to hurt your feelings, so we'll just leave you like that, and that's all you're going to be for your entire life. And you've got lots of people in the West who they look at what's going on in the world, and there are lots of people who do hate Muslims, and they find Muslims to be evil people and so on. And if you ask them why, it's look at these bad things that they do. But because of my background, I'm really not in a position to say, look at this awful thing you've done. You're just hopeless right now. Because I knew I got a second chance I didn't deserve, given the things I've done in my life. And so the vast majority of Muslims, if you say, look at what they've done, I've done worse in my life. I've done worse in my life than they have. And so, I mean, I look back and I'm glad that someone started arguing with me and made me rethink things. And so, I want to be that kind of person for Muslims out there. And so I think that is affected by
Got it. I was going to say that the content of what you say, its veracity is true or false independently of what your religiosity is, right? So if you quote something from the Quran,
Yes,
that is
yes,
true, right? I think
yeah.
I think the where your religiosity comes in is in the manner by which the opposing camp responds to you. I think there's something in their view that is more sinister about you because it is as though you have an ulterior motive to
Mhm.
your goal, right? If you're an atheist or you are completely dispassionate, I would, Bill Warner, for example, do you know who that is?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So I suspect, I mean, maybe there's, of course, differences in style. You're a lot more satirical and a lot more sarcastic, which might can irk some people, although I
Mhm.
think it's very effective. And so I suspect that he receives, as a matter of fact, I think I know that he receives a lot less venom and death threats than you do because he doesn't come across as though, well, let me show you why my religion is the correct one and yours
Yeah.
is false. So I suspect that that might also explain why you receive that extra venom. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And as far as you know, the satire and you know, the my general approach in a lot of my videos, that actually ties in more than people know with being a Christian, because lots of people say, hey, you're supposed to be nice if you're a Christian. I don't know what they're talking about, because I mean, Jesus, I mean, you know, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You know, he could be pretty brutal in his criticism. But it actually ties in, because you know, I get messages from Christians and who say, hey, you know, I want to reach out to Muslims and talk to Muslims, but I'm scared that I'm gonna get killed. And so I view part of this as, well, I'll make myself a bigger target than you. And so, you know, as long as I'm safe out there and I'm running my mouth, as long as I'm safe, you guys don't have to worry. And so whatever people think about, you know, me or Pamela Geller or Robert Spencer, whether you disagree with them or not, they are performing a huge service, in the sense that everyone who's less of a target than people who are actually out there getting attention for criticizing Islam are kind of protecting everyone else.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned a couple of these folks. So I've had Tommy Robinson on. Do you know who that
Mhm.
is? So
Oh,
I
yeah.
yeah, so I had Tommy Robinson on. I had Robert Spencer on. Now I have you. I would just correct me if I'm wrong, but you would probably be considered three of the sort of the more polarizing folks. And I would receive a lot of emails from people or
Mhm.
messages where they say, "Oh, geez, why are you associating yourself with these bigots?" And then many of these exact same people, after they would hear my conversation with said folks, would come back and say, "Oh my God, I've been hoodwinked. There's nothing in their discourse that struck me as phobic or bigoted." And so it
Yeah.
shows you the power of propaganda, where tons of otherwise really smart people start off with the premise that you're speaking to David Wood, but that guy is a KKK Nazi. What are you doing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, what's funny is, I mean, if you hang out with like Robert Spencer, I've hung out with him many times, and Robert's just hilarious, and all he does is laugh the entire time. He has such a good time. He loves life so much, and he's critical of Islam specifically because of what it teaches about jihad and subjugating unbelievers. That's his reason for doing it. And if you ask someone, well, he's a racist and a bigot, and that's all there is to him. And it works, right? I mean, if you don't know the man and you just know he talks about Islam, and then someone tells you the reason he talks about Islam is this, well, that would make sense of it. That would make sense of why he's criticizing Islam if he's actually a bigot. But it's not true.
Exactly. Let's talk about. I think that's probably the first place where I became familiar with your work a few years ago. I caught a YouTube clip where you and I think maybe Nabil and some other guys
Yep.
from the organization had gone to Dearborn, Michigan,
Yep.
Sharia zone number one in the United States. Since there are now several other ones in Minneapolis and so on, where you were walking around. Well, you know what? Let me not say what it is. Why don't you describe the whole situation? People are not going to believe that this is happening in the United States. Go
Yeah.
for it.
Well, it actually, before it became that public, it started a couple years earlier. In 2008, I went there, and I was just brought in because there were Christian evangelists who wanted to go talk to Muslims on the sidewalks around the festival and so on, and wanted to just hand them some tracts or hand them a copy of the Bible in Arabic or something like that. And so I was brought in because there were Christians who didn't know anything about Islam, and so what are Muslims going to say to us? What arguments are they going to use? What objections are they going to bring up? So they wanted to become somewhat familiar with what Muslims in general were going to say to them. So I ran them through that, and so that was 2008, and we went out to the festival and they went and preached. And if they, I basically stood around. I'm not good at, starting conversations on the street. I'm really awful. But if they got into a heated argument and couldn't answer, some of them would bring the person over to me and say, hey, he just said this. And so we'd start discussing the evidence. So that was 2008, and there were no problems and everything went well. In 2009, the Dearborn Police Department made it a rule that you couldn't hand out, they said you couldn't hand out anything, but in practice, they would stop you from handing out any Christian materials. Not at the festival. That was not an objection. It was at the public sidewalks around the festival. And so this is the police department declaring that you can't hand things out on the public sidewalks.
Which is literally a violation of the Constitution,
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, and eventually it went to court, but those things sort of take years with the appeals and so on. Eventually and the court said, what are you talking about? Parks and public streets, that's free speech area number one right there, where you don't, unless it's something extreme, you don't interfere in those areas. And there was nothing extreme there, right? So, but anyway, the police department had announced that they're gonna they're going to do that if you hand something out on the sidewalks. So what happened was security started using the system a little bit, because now you had Christians who went and they were just talking to people. They weren't handing anything out. And security, the Muslim security guards, they wanted to get rid of these people too. So they started over and over again. They kept doing this. They would walk up to someone and say, hey, I wanted to look up something in a Bible. I see you've got a Bible in your bag there. Could you let me see it real quick? And as soon as your hand went out, boom, they clicked a picture of you and they took you to police and said, this person is violating the rules, and kicked them out and so on. So it was at this festival in 2009 when there was a big booth that said, got questions, we got answers. And it's a Muslim booth. And Nabil's a former Muslim. And he walks up to the booth and says, I got a question. You're handing out a tract right here that says Islam's a religion of peace, and you're quoting these verses. How do you interpret Surah 9, verse 29? Fight those who do not believe in Allah. And the guy goes, I don't know. Why don't you open it up and read it to me? And it's like, you don't know this? You guys are the ones who are answering people's questions, and you don't know these basic Quran verses? So Nabil starts reading this. Anyway, long story short, security shows up and starts slapping us all over the place. And
you're disturbing the peace. You're disturbing people's right for enjoyment. What's the charge? What could be the charge?
It's we didn't want to be accused of doing anything, and so we had a camera, right? Because we had understood with people walking up and saying, "Hey, can I look at your Bible?" Now I can take you to police. We understood that these guys are doing some dirty stuff to get people in trouble. And so we didn't want to get accused of doing something we didn't. So one of us would stand back with a camera and they were all cool, and they were, the people we were recording were fine with being recorded and so on. But security would walk up and say, you can't record here. And what are you talking about? There are people with camera phones all over the place recording. What are you talking about? And so we refused to shut our cameras off, especially because they surrounded us, right? They surrounded us and they're telling us, turn the cameras off. You guys are about to beat us to death, it looks like. We're not turning our cameras off. So anyway, they just started slapping us around, and eventually we left. And we talked to police afterwards, and we said, look, we don't want anyone arrested. We don't want anyone in trouble. Just let those people know that they can't slap people around for recording in public. And just let them know that, and there won't be any problems. And they said, sure, we'll take care of it. So we showed up the following year to make sure that people did understand that they can't slap people around for things like that. And that's when we were walking out of the festival, and a group of maybe 12 or 15 young Muslims, 14, 15-year-olds, gathered around Nabil, started asking him questions. They were great questions. They were the sort of questions that we know young Muslims have, and they would like to ask someone. I've found out on numerous occasions over the years that older Muslims do not like it. If you're a Christian and you talk to younger Muslims, they get really, really upset about that. And Nabil's sitting there answering the questions, and he's praising them. He's saying, wow, these are great questions, guys. I'm glad you're asking this. And then he answers the question and then says, anyone else? Who's next? Who's next? And so it's a group of young guys. I thought we were about to all head to IHOP or something like that after that, because we're sitting there having a good conversation. And then police showed up and put us all in handcuffs and threw us in jail. And so we got bailed out. We got bailed out early the next morning. But yeah, they took us in jail, put us in jail for having a discussion on a public street. And they said that we were inciting a riot there. Nabil answering questions of 14, 15-year-olds. was inciting a riot. But it was really disturbing because they kept our cameras, right? We could prove exactly what happened there, and they kept our cameras for I think almost a month. And meanwhile, the media is reporting that we were screaming at Muslims. We were telling Muslims they're going to go to hell. We're inciting a riot, and in order to protect the peace, they had to lock us up. And we're going, what are you talking about? We've got to give us our footage back. They eventually had to be given a court order to give us our cameras back. And by that time, everyone was convinced that we really are these maniacs who run around screaming at people. But we went ahead, and for that, if it's a police department, then I'll sue over that. So we actually sued them, and
you
was
won, right? You won the case. Now, all that footage is now up on YouTube if people want to see it, right?
Yep.
Is it available on your website?
Yeah, I mean, if you go on YouTube and you just type in Dearborn, I think it pops up.
Gotcha.
If you type in Dearborn arrests, that's the unedited footage, because we posted some clips of our arrests, and people would say, "Oh, but right before that, that's when you were
right.
Muslims and causing a riot." And we go, "Okay," so we'd have to post more, and then they would say, "Oh, but you posted this clip and that clip, but between those clips, you were yelling." And finally, I said, "Okay, here's the unedited footage. Show me what we did here." And
now, of course, in this case, I mean, the court system, the use of the court system allowed you to be vindicated. But of course, this only works as long as the demographic realities are as they are today. As those demographic realities change, then your ability to use our system, our democratic system, is somewhat tainted, because you never know whether. I mean, there was a case in Philadelphia, I think, a few years ago, right, where a Muslim convert judge actually chastised a guy for wearing a Muhammad suit during a parade. Are you familiar with this case? Right? And so in a sense, one can rejoice that the system is working, but the system can only keep working as long as the demographic realities are as they are, and not how they're potentially heading, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, the system in Dearborn did not work. We had to go up to higher courts outside of there in order to be vindicated, because the system inside, you get eaten alive there.
And now the police who were sort of doing all this Orwellian stuff, they weren't all necessarily Muslim, correct? They were
most of them aren't Muslims, but they view it.
So they already have the psychology of the dhimmi, right? And maybe you could explain to us what that concept is.
Yeah, well, that's there are people who think that all non-Muslims have to be killed according to Islam, and that's not the case. You can be a subjugated people. Christians and Jews can agree to pay tribute money to the Muslim community and still be Christians, and but you're a second-class citizen. And that's
second class, by the way, second class is a generous nomenclature. You could say third class, possibly, right?
Yeah. And so now, what's absolutely amazing is you still end up with this. You end up with this system, even if it's not officially the law of the land, in areas like Dearborn, where the police department find out that, hey, we have to be on really good terms with the Muslim community. Well, I mean, why? Well, we're looking for terrorists, and we have to, we need their, we need to be on good terms with them, and so on. And then they find out, well, to be on good terms with us, you have to do other things. Like, see those Christians over there bothering people? See them? You got to take care of those guys, and they'll do it, and they'll come after you.
Now, one of the things that's very powerful in your work, other than, of course, your satirical delivery and so on, is that no one could accuse you of not being very familiar with the original text. But I did a clip recently on something that I called the holy 3M of apologia. Let me mention those words. It's mistranslated, it's misinterpreted, and it's misunderstood. And so the idea is the apologists for Islam will always come back with one of these 3Ms. There are a few other strategies. And so I'm sure that in your lengthy debates that you've had with Muslims, they've hit you with the holy 3Ms. What is your typical rebuttal to sort of this collection of apologia?
Well, my short response is at first to agree with it. So they'll say, you can't understand Islam if you're not reading it in the Arabic, and you can't trust translations and so on. And then I go, wow, So what you're telling me is Islam is completely useless to most of the world's population. Most of the world's population can't speak Arabic, and even among Arabs, most of them aren't familiar with classical Arabic and so on. And so, I mean, I know several fluent Arabic speakers who have a massive problem when they're reading the Quran. They don't know what they read. So just speaking Arabic isn't enough. You have to actually know 7th century Arabic. And so what you're telling me is if it can't be understood, then it's basically useless. Well, how can it be the religion for all mankind if it's useless to the vast majority of people? What you're telling me is I need to just listen to someone, right? I need to listen to what you tell me about Islam. But why should I listen to you rather than to, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi? Why would I not listen to him?
But he's not a true Muslim. He's a fake Muslim.
That's the point. How do I know who the true Muslim is without having some text to tell me which is the true Muslim, right? In other words, I need a standard to tell me who's actually the true devout Muslim and who is misinterpreting the text. I can't know that these texts are being misinterpreted unless I can examine the text. And that's what you're telling me I can't possibly do. I can't examine the text. And so I don't know what to believe. And I might as well just believe Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi as quickly as I would believe you. So I'm not in much of a different position from before. But so that's how I initially respond. But if we go deeper, the Quran claims repeatedly to be clear, right? Over and over again, like a beating drum. These are the clear words. This is the clear message, and so on. Allah's claiming that his revelations are clear. If they're clear, we should be able to understand them pretty well. And if we can't, then great. Then the Quran just isn't what it claims to be. And so, I usually go along those lines. But at the end of the day, that's kind of a lower level apologetic tactic for people who don't know much.
But they have to do that against you because they can't use the excuse that you don't know the content. And therefore, once you start quoting this surah and that hadith, they have to find a way, right? You're not one of the original companions of Muhammad. Therefore, you can't speak about this, right?
And what I mean there is if you're talking with more scholarly Muslims, they'll try to actually respond. They'll say, yes, this is what it says, but you have to go to the historical background and look at this situation and that situation. Then that unpacks the deeper meaning. Whereas, the sort of lower level tactic is, you can't understand any of this. You can't understand this. And for that other category of Muslims who are actually trying to respond, I had a great debate with Dr. Shabir Ali, on is the Quran a book of peace? And so we went through the Quran, and I deliberately used the exact same arguments I use in my YouTube videos, just so no one could say I caught him off guard or I was using something. I used the exact same argument I use in my 3 Stages of Jihad video, which has been out for a long time. And he just couldn't answer it. He tried quoting a couple Quran passages, and I would go back to the Muslim sources and show him that's not how Muhammad's companions interpreted it. And so if they're not interpreting that way, it's very odd for modern Muslims to come up with interpretations. And so really there was no answer for it.
So what is the strategy then? I mean, is it simply the fact that there is lack of information and most people are cognitively lazy? They basically believe in some monotheistic God, right? I mean, if I'm born somewhere in Saudi Arabia and if I'm a decent person, I believe that there's a monotheistic God. I know that I should pray 5 times a day. I know that I should give zakat and so on. And I don't know all of the specifics, and I don't care about worrying about all those different surahs and so on. And therefore, what's the solution? Is it that everybody should try to be convinced to read that stuff so that they can hopefully have some of that inner turmoil?
Yeah. Well, you have something similar in both the Muslim world and in the non-Muslim world as far as lack of familiarity with what the Muslim sources actually say. But it's for completely different reasons. In the Muslim sources, there are so many warnings about if you misinterpret something here or you come up with your own view, you're going to hell. I mean, Surah 4, verse 65 says that if you find in yourself any resistance against Muhammad's decisions, you're not a real Muslim. I mean, think about that. I've never met a Muslim who doesn't have resistance against Muhammad's decisions. I start quoting them to them, no, it's not, no, he didn't really mean that. They all have resistance against his teachings. And the Quran is saying you're not a real Muslim. And so, and that, of course, and Muhammad said in the hadith that anyone who innovates, so you come up with your own way of doing things, you're going to hell. And the impact, the psychological impact that that has had over the centuries of Muslims is that if you just try and read a little bit of the Quran, or you just try and read a little bit of the Hadith, you might come up with your own interpretation that is not based on a full awareness of the historical background or other things Muhammad said or other things, all the different scholarly opinions on it. You might not know that, and you might come up with a wrong interpretation, and then you're going to hell. So in order to avoid that, you either need to learn it all, or you just need to keep your mouth shut and listen to the scholars. So unless you are going to go all the way and become a sheikh, don't bother trying to learn it. Just listen to what your leader has said. So they have information that's completely filtered by their leaders for what they want to hear. And that's why Muslims, I mean, when you start talking about the satanic verses, and they have no clue what you're talking about, even though this is all over their early sources, they never come across it. And in the West, there are a couple of issues, namely, if you start studying and actually telling people what it says, you get, labeled a hate monger and so on. But even before that, most Muslim sources haven't been around for very long as far as available in English translations. Back in the day, you have the Quran, but at the time when Islam was becoming popular, during the time of like Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X and so on, when it's gaining momentum in the West, you don't have most Muslim sources available, and so a lot of what they're being told, it was complete nonsense from an Islamic perspective, but Muslim preachers would adapt their message for a Western audience, and to any particular group that they're talking to. And it's only now that we really have widespread access to the Muslim sources, and even Muslims in their own lands who for centuries were sheltered from hearing anything critical of Islam or hearing anything positive about any other religion or ideology. Now they've got the internet, and now they can start learning this from themselves. Their leaders can no longer shelter them. So people in the West who historically couldn't investigate it because they just didn't have the sources, and therefore if they wanted to learn something, they would have to go to a Muslim who may or may not be telling them the truth. And Muslims in the Muslim areas where they're sheltered historically, they're no longer they're no longer shielded from this. And so we're the generation right now that can deal with this problem. We're the first generation where non-Muslim countries have all the sources available to them, and we're the first generation where Muslims are just wide open, either because they've moved to the West and they're at school here and they're around other people, or because even in their own lands, as long as they've got a computer and YouTube, they can hear all the facts about their religion. So it's easy to be negative about this and say, hey, it's 1.6 billion Muslims, and you have all these terrorist attacks. The positive side is we're the first generation that's actually really capable of interacting with the Muslim sources and really going after Islam at its core.
I appreciate that optimistic bent, but let me throw in some pessimism in there. I've had several great guests on my show, all of whom are either still practicing Muslims, but who are very liberal and secular and actually attack not Islam, but Islamism. They always find a way to sort of mitigate what the attack is. And the amount of mental gymnastics that some of these guys go through to still protect the faith, whether either publicly in speaking to me or privately offline, is astounding. So while I agree that access to the information is ultimately what is going to help, win the battle of ideas, it's not a guarantee, because these guys know their text, but they come up with just breathtaking, Olympic level mental gymnastics to defend the faith, right? It's about culture. It's about a misunderstanding. I call it unicorn Islam, right? If I'm a gay Muslim woman, I somehow construct a narrative that says, no, but Islam loves lesbians. If I'm a lover of Jews and I'm Muslim, no, Islam loves the Jews. And so there's always the capacity
Muhammad was the greatest feminist in all of history.
Greatest feminist, greatest LBGT guy, greatest green marketing guy, greatest Jew lover. And so how do we then deal with those guys? Because it's not that they don't have information, it's that they twist the information in any way that they can to protect their faith. How do we deal with those guys?
Well, I'm assuming you're talking about like Zuhdi Jasser or someone like that.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about him and a few others.
Yeah, and I think they're well-meaning, right? And I think they look at the world and say, hey, we're not going to shake Muslims out of their beliefs, and so let's just try and steer them in the right direction. and it's just not going to work. I mean, if you look at the text, right? If you look at the text, and it says that the text is perfectly clear. Allah repeatedly says he's clear, and then he tells you you can't have any resistance against Muhammad's decisions. If you resist Muhammad's decisions, you're not a real Muslim. And you start putting those together, then when you read something commanded by Allah or something said by Muhammad, it's very difficult to say, well, let me just reinterpret this in the light of my Western beliefs, right? I need to be careful about reinterpreting this. So when Muhammad says, I've been commanded to fight people until they say there's no God but Allah, of course you can say, oh, that's really talking about self-defense, and if someone's attacking you or something like, of course you can say that. You can read, fight those who do not believe in Allah, and then say, well, despite the fact that there's not one word about self-defense or anyone attacking the Muslim community in the entire passage, it's nevertheless about self-defense, and it's only saying fight and self-defense. You can do that, but if you are taking it seriously, I'm a Muslim, that's one who submits. How do I submit? By obeying Allah and Muhammad. Allah and Muhammad are supposed to be clear, and I'm not allowed to reinterpret what they say. How then do I immediately reinterpret everything they say about fighting unbelievers and so on? And so it's, hey, it's great that you're a peaceful Muslim, and I mean, Zuhdi Jasser, I mean, he's really going after jihad. I mean, he's doing good work in that sense. But at the same time, if you have a widespread religion, you are always going to have a personality type, right? There are different types, because I'm this personality type of, hey, I'm going with, unless I have a very good reason to reinterpret something, then I'm just going with what the text says. That's my personality type, but that's the same personality type of people in ISIS and so on.
I was just going to say, you're describing ISIS basically.
And so that will work for people of a certain personality type. It's not going to work for people with a different personality type who are going to say, I'm not listening to you, Zuhdi Jasser. You are not, have never been, and never will be an authoritative source of Islamic doctrine and practice. Allah and Muhammad are. So I need to listen to them, and I don't get to reinterpret it based on Western values. I need to do exactly what it says, and you're going to get jihad. And I mean, think about it. That's exactly what you have. You have Zuhdi Jasser. You have CARE, you have all these individuals and organizations shouting from the rooftops, everyone up to and including the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Great Britain, everyone telling us one thing. And if you look at terrorist attacks over the past several years, you see it going up like this. And you say you deal with statistics, you know what that means, right? Unless something changes, that keeps going up. That is the type of curve you only want to see if it's like your bank account or your YouTube subscribers or something like that. You don't want to see that if it's people being killed. And so my question for them would be, do you think this is going to work? Because you're doing it and it's failing miserably. Things are becoming more radical, more violent. Do you have a plan B? Because if this is your only plan, just running around saying, hey, let's interpret this in a peaceful light, this is failing miserably. And so if you don't have a plan B, why don't we go with my plan?
So based on what you just said, let's say the last 5 minutes, I can almost guess then what the response to my next question is going to be. Actually, 2 questions. We can lump them together. Number one, so then I'm assuming that you would think that any exercise in reforming Islam is probably useless. And if that's the case, then if Islam is non-reformable, then does it have a place in secular, liberal, pluralistic, tolerant democracies? What do you think?
Well, Muslims can be reformed, so people can be reformed, and people are capable of interpreting anything however they want, right? I mean, you could open up the Qur'an and say that this is telling me to bake pancakes, right? You can interpret anything to mean anything you want.
But you really can't, though, right? I mean, in the sense that
I'm saying individuals are capable of doing it, but Islam, because it claims to be clear and because it specifically says don't reinterpret this, there's always going to be a huge tension between Muslims who are reinterpreting it and saying that what Allah really says, what Allah really means here when he says this is something different. If you're taking the text seriously, you don't get to say that, because what you just said is you can say it more clearly than Allah in his perfectly clear book said it. You're claiming to be greater than Allah. Lots of Muslims aren't going to do that. And so just based, again, on personality types of, yes, you'll have people who are more feeling based and so on. You'll have people who want to interpret the text for exactly what it means. And unless you come up with a way of changing human nature to where all people are the sorts of people who would just reinterpret something that you don't like, then this is not, Islam's not going to reform, right? Unless you took all Qurans and changed what it says, and you took, Bukhari and Muslim and so on, and changed what these texts say, then the texts are, some of the clearest passages are, fight those who do not believe in Allah, fight the unbelievers who are near to you, and let them find in you hardness. These are some of the clearest passages in the Quran. If you want to reinterpret those, why not reinterpret everything else? Why not reinterpret Muhammad saying pray 5 times a day? Why not reinterpret that? Why not reinterpret the Shahada? If you get to reinterpret that, then you're on shaky ground, and there are always going to be people who take it seriously, who understand that. You don't get to reinterpret these things. And so as long as Islam is around, as long as it continues, you're going to have violence emerging from it regularly, in spite of all the peaceful Muslims.
So then, if we say link it then to a very pragmatic reality that the West is facing in all the different nations, how do we navigate? And I've asked this of many of my guests. How do we then navigate the tension between being a humane culture that lets in people that are fleeing war, who are otherwise kind and decent and peaceful, from the reality, which is there's always going to be a group within that people coming in who are, they don't have to be ISIS fighters. And I've often said that, right? If you let in Syrian refugees into Canada, I can bet you that the levels of anti-Semitism are going to hover around 90%. That's probably a charitable number. So if you are Jewish, then probably letting in 50,000 people, of whom 90% are genocidal in their hatred of the Jews, it's perfectly rational to be afraid of that, even though those people might invite you to a nice dinner with hummus and kibbeh, right? Yeah. But that still means that they hate gays, and they don't have the same feelings for women, and they don't like Jews. So then how do we navigate this tension? We want to be humane, we want to be open, we want to let people in who are fleeing war. I fled war, but how do we then deal with the other problems? How do we do that?
Yeah, you of course have the people who say, just close off nations to immigration and so on. For the record, I get in trouble for saying, no, that's not the route I think we should go. I would certainly want to change the face of how immigration currently works. If you look at the thousands of people who are marching through Europe, they seem like almost all of them were like 25-year-old Muslims,
really,
right?
Muscular, ominous-looking guys. Yes.
In other words, the people who are most and best able to survive in a war-torn area, they were the ones fleeing, and the people who were least able to survive in a war-torn area, they were the ones left behind because they can't make the march.
You know what the usual argument against that fact is? That they send their men first to make sure that it is okay wherever they're going, so that they can then bring their women. And so they leave the women and children back in Raqqa. They move to Mannheim to make sure that Mannheim and Cologne are safe. There you go.
Yeah. Good, upstanding men there, leaving their wives back in the middle of the war. So, I think there needs to be some priorities here, but people resist all priorities. If you're a religious minority, even a Muslim religious minority, that should be a consideration. If you're a woman or a child or an old person, that should give you some priority over 25-year-old, very strong, young, strapping lad. And even then, there are refugee populations in the world that are much worse off. You look at like starving people in areas of Africa where, you wonder how this little kid can even be alive. And, and our concern is, hey, we need to get this 25-year-old Muslim in there because he's got it rough. Well, he's got it even in his own situation. That's not as bad as some of these other people. And so, it's a tricky situation. But if you're talking about 25-year-old young Muslims, I would be in favor of, hey, since you're coming here, we're going to hook you up to a machine that's called a lie detector, and we're going to have this guy here. He's going to ask you some questions, and we want you to answer honestly. If you don't answer honestly, we're going to send you back. And if you give the wrong answers on some of these things, we're going to send you back.
I think people will be able to beat that lie detector, right?
Well, it can happen, but most people can't. So, someone would get through, but most people can't beat a lie detector. And so,
basically, you tie them up and you say, Jews are great people. They're your equal. And then you see what the physiological response is. That's what you're saying.
I would, yeah, things like that. Or, hey, do you believe that Muslims are superior to non-Muslims?
Right.
Do you believe that if you get a hold of a 12-year-old British girl, it's okay to rape her? Do you believe that? And check the responses. I understand that's not foolproof, but I mean, the situation you have now, just tens of thousands marching across borders and so on, and leaving the people who, I mean, it's sad the people who are actually refugees there, when, I mean, who should be much higher up on the list, because that's like mothers who are selling their 11 and 12-year-old daughters into prostitution to wealthy Saudis, practicing mutta, because they can't.
You want to? I mean, I know what that is, but you want to explain what that is?
Oh, mutta. Yeah, in the Muslim sources, Muhammad allowed his followers, his warriors, to hire prostitutes if they were away. It's called mutta. And some of the Muslim sources say that he eventually forbade the practice, he outlawed it. But those exact same Muslim sources in other hadiths say that it was actually one of the later caliphs who outlawed it, and then they just said that Muhammad said it. And so they're all strong hadiths here, and so you can kind of make whatever you want of it. And so if you want to practice mutta, then which means temporary marriage, which basically means you go up to a woman, say to a prostitute, hey, I'm going to marry you for the next 2 hours while we have sex. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you this amount of money, and then you'll be my wife for 2 hours or 2 days or something like that. And one of the bad situations arising out of Syria has been when women are starving and they realize they're just going to die, they'll sell their 11 and 12-year-old daughters for 2 weeks to a rich Saudi, and that will feed them for several months, but they're selling their daughters into prostitution. So there are people who are in really bad situations there. And so, but they're not the people who are coming here, right? They're not the people who are coming here as refugees and immigrants.
Well, some have said that why don't you just provide all the refugees with areas of safety in those zones, right? I mean, in other words, you don't need to have a complete rearrangement, a new social experiment where you change the character of the West to be in order to be humane, right? I mean, we know that, for example, the Gulf countries have let in, I think, upon last checking, it was 0, right? So you could still be very humane. You could still recognize that most of these people need our help and are perfectly peaceful and lovely people, without necessarily saying, well, you know what, I'm going to import all these people here and change the. I mean, I've seen now in Montreal, right? I mean, I live in Montreal, Canada. And by the way, I know, not that I should have to qualify this, but I've known and met and been friends with more Muslims than most people could ever imagine. So again, of course, most Muslims are very nice. But the reality is, when Islam comes into a place, it changes the character of that society. I see it in Montreal, right? You now see women who are dressed in, really astoundingly repressive, sartorial attire. And then there's the next girl next to her wearing a mini skirt. The demographic numbers are going to be such that both of these two things cannot coexist, and it doesn't take Einstein to recognize it. And to recognize it doesn't make you a member of the KKK Nazi party, right? So the bottom line is, I mean, it's very frustrating because the reflex of most people is to always recoil back into you're bigoted, you're racist, and so on. Whereas in reality, we're truly being liberal. We want to protect secular, plural societies, right?
So as far as a solution to this problem, I mean, the situation now is unsustainable in the sense that you're headed for disaster one way or another, right? Pew Research shows that Muslims have the highest birth rates in the world. The population is growing rapidly, but it's not just in Muslim areas. Even in non-Muslim areas, they have higher birth rates than others. But Islam has a really, really poor knack for making stable countries that people want to live in. So people always want to leave the countries and go somewhere else. And so Islam is spreading rapidly due to birth rates, and it's spreading rapidly in non-Muslim areas due to immigration and refugee status and so on. And so this ends in disaster unless something changes. Something has to change, or you're just going to end in disaster. And basically, you're looking towards a future of, a massive war or something like this, or something happens before then. And I'm of the view, I'm optimistic in this sense, that I don't think Islam can stand up to criticism. I don't think Muhammad can stand up to criticism. And so what I would be in favor of is just, I think that if people learn the basics of Muhammad's life and can share them to where these things become common knowledge. One, I don't think you'll have anyone converting to Islam. I've never met someone who converted to Islam based on a careful study of Islam. The people I've met who've converted to Islam say some of the most ridiculous reasons for why they converted that I've ever heard in my life, and it's almost always based on them being given false information by the Muslim preacher they were talking to.
Islam is feminism, right?
Yeah, things like that. The Qur'an is a scientific masterpiece. Right. People will convert to this and won't even bother looking it up and seeing what the Qur'an actually says. And so, if people generally only convert when they're given some sort of false information, and Muslims, when they give their reasons for being Muslims, give usually reasons that are completely wrong, and again, not just according to me, according to their own sources, they're wrong, then I'm convinced that if basic facts became common knowledge to the point where if a Muslim preacher shows up and says, Muhammad is a feminist, and 8 hands go up and say, we got some questions for you on this one, then one, you're not going to be seeing people convert to Islam, and I think you're going to see a lot of Muslims leave Islam, and even Muslims who don't leave Islam, I think they're going to be shaken enough to where they're not going and blowing themselves up. Now, keep in mind there is here again a personality type that will continue to believe in Islam and will continue to believe to go blow people up and so on. But I think you'd have a much smaller problem right now if general facts about Islam and about Muhammad were common knowledge among Muslims and among non-Muslims, because I've just seen it over and over again. I've seen Muslims just be shocked at hearing things about Muhammad that they didn't know before. And so before we end in some bloody futuristic battle or something like this, I said, why not try this approach, right? Why not try everyone sit down, learn about Islam, and start responding to it? And I think that's and what's amazing is I'm looking at this like this is the only way I can see that doesn't end in bloody disaster. And so that's I'm going to go out and share as much as I can about Islam so I can try and get it to become common knowledge. And it's, you're a bigot and a hate monger for spreading all of this stuff about Islam. I'm trying to save all these people's lives, right? Well, I'm trying to save Muslim lives by, and one of the most heartbreaking things is after several terrorist attacks, you find out they're converts to Islam. And Facebook will have the page down as soon as it becomes public. But if you catch it right after the name is announced, you can go on their Facebook pages and see what they were arguing. And some of these are converts to Islam, and you look, and they're actually giving their reasons for converting, and it's completely false, right? What they were told is false and demonstrably factually false. And you think this guy went and died for this. He went and died for something that's obviously false. And if someone had just told him, no, that's not true, this guy would still be alive and his victims would still be alive. And yet we're told giving people that information is bad. And that shows that you're a white supremacist and so on, because you're trying to save these people's lives. Very strange world we live in.
I was going to say, and we're about to end, I in a different way from the way you approach the problem, one of the reasons that I'm engaged in this discussion is that I completely agree with you that there are ultimately 2 ways that we're going to solve this problem. We're either going to solve it peacefully or we're going to solve it down the road non-peacefully. In other words, what I call the castrati brigade, right? The guys who are without testicles. The reality is that not all men have lost their balls, and at some point, men will wake up. And when they wake up, their response may not be very pretty, right? So we can either wait till that point and have a repeat of the Lebanese Civil War in every street corner all over the West, or we can talk about it now and hopefully avoid these problems down the line. And so in that sense, it's difficult to argue that someone like you is actually not a man of peace, because in a sense, you are literally trying to avoid the bloodbath that's going to come down the line, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I have no doubt. I have no doubt that people will eventually understand what they're up against. It's just, do you finally catch on 15 years from now where there is no peaceful solution in sight? Or do you catch on right now with everything going on in the world where you still have a shot, at least in America and in other places, you still have a shot at peaceful resolution of this.
Let us hope that it's the peaceful one that wins out. David, before I let you go, are there any projects, any books you're working on, anything that you'd like to promote that is not yet public that you might use this platform to promote?
I've actually written several books or part of books. It's finishing them. That's always in the back of my mind. That hey, I can make a video on this, and that will actually reach people around the world much more quickly than the book will. But yeah, I'll be wrapping up a couple of books I've been working on here in the next couple months and send them off. But mainly on YouTube. It's I'm getting around a little over a million hits a month now, which is pretty good. But when I think of the amount of information that really needs to be posted, there's awesome stuff coming, right? I mean, we have this opportunity that other generations didn't have, and I want to take full advantage of it. And so, people want to follow me up on YouTube. I got most of my videos. I just think through them and then make them and so on. And it's a very quick process. But I got some things I've been working on for several years in order to get it exactly how I want it. And so, yeah,
you always have this
Great
very
stuff.
diabolical, not diabolical in a nice way, grin on your face as you deliver your satirical material. I highly recommend your work. I know that I often watch it, and oftentimes, despite how serious the material is, you have me cracking up. So keep up the great work. Real pleasure talking to you, David. Stay on the line. Thank you so much.
All right, brother.
Cheers.